So as we gather our energies back together, I want to do something, a little exercise that I do with my students. Drew is called the University in the Forest because of all these beautiful trees, and I have a background in biology. And so I get my students to think about how we can't breathe without the trees and the plants. That is the respiratory cycle of the plants and animals exchanging those essential carbon dioxide and oxygen. So we are co-conspirators. We breathe together. And then I remind them of the Genesis texts that tell us that God breathed life into creatures. So we are exchanging God's breath each time we breathe. So think about pollution now as the defilement of God's breath. What are we doing? So I want you just to take one moment to take a deep breath and realize that when we take that deep breath, we are sharing each other's breaths. And we are sharing the creature's breaths. Breaths. I have lozenges in my mouth. And the trees and the plants. And just have that be a centering moment for us as we bring all that wonderful energy back in. So I invite you, just take a deep breath. And now I'm going to add one more element to it. And this I was taught by a rabbi. In some parts of the Jewish tradition, you do not say the name of God. But that's because you don't have to, because you breathe it. Yahweh. Yahweh. So think of that as a breathing prayer. That not only are you exchanging God's breath, but you're saying God's name with each breath. Thank you for your attention, and welcome back. I'm going to be a little lower key as I see if I destroyed my phone. I doubt it. I try hard. And introduce our next folks. And again, I hope you know many of them, but they're wonderful people. Reverend Jenny Phillips is Creation Care Program Manager at Global Ministries in Atlanta. But she's an elder from the Pacific Northwest Conference, so you see how she spans the country. She leads the Global Ministry Earth Keepers Training Program, and we're all very grateful for the work she's doing. And the UMCOR, Renewable Energy Access Program, which delivers renewable energy to communities living with energy poverty. And this is such an exciting program. Reverend Dr. Mark Davies is the Wimberly Professor of Social and Ethological Ethics at Oklahoma City University, where he's also founding director of the World House Institute for Social and Ecological Responsibility. I love that combination. As part of his role as executive director of the United Methodist General Board of Higher Ed and Ministries Leadership, Education, and Development Hub North America, Dr. Davies helps oversees the Global Methodist Social and Ecological Responsibility Initiative that focuses on networking United Methodists and Methodist institutions of higher education. That's partly how I've gotten to know him, in cooperative work related to research, curricular development, and co-curricular engagement. And he's also, I know, been very involved with the discussions about the natural principles as part of the social principles. Anita Green is Director of Sustainable Investment Strategies at WestPath, Benefits and Investments. And I know about WestPath from my former university president, whose name I completely forgot right now. But you can you? I don't know. Well, I will remember this very important woman after this is over, and I should shut up and quit ad-libbing. Anyway, she works collaboratively with both faith-based and secular investors to engage corporations on environmental performance and seek ways to invest, to consider the risks and opportunities related to low-carbon transition. And as I hope you all know, this use and focus on what happens with all of the investments of something like the United Methodist Church is so important. And Bishop Bruce, and I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name. Good. Is Bishop of the Dakotas, Minnesota Episcopal area, and I know you rearranged your schedule to be with us today, so we're so very appreciative. He's been a vocal leader in the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline and standing in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux. And That is such important work. Thank you for that witness. So you know the rules of the game now, and I'm going to let you just go down the line.
I'm Jenny, as you heard, and Laurel already told you about my extreme itineracy across the country. I also went through a pretty significant transformation from being a church radical to a church bureaucrat. Some of you know me from my work in agitating on the ways in which the church should invest its money. And now I'm working within an agency where I'm trying to agitate from within about how we use our resources for creation care programs and for developing sustainable infrastructure that creates high impact on behalf of the church. So Global Ministries and UMCOR developed the position that I occupy because they saw very clearly the connection between the disaster relief and recovery work we do and the way in which we're living in the world. And they felt like it was really important that the church really dig in and name the root cause of some of the turmoil that we're seeing in the world. And I'm really excited about some of the initiatives I get to work on. Laurel mentioned the Earth Keepers program. It's a training program that you're going to get to hear more about tomorrow. And then I work with UMCOR's Sustainable Development Team, and our folks work on initiatives for sustainable agriculture, clean water access, and then renewable energy for communities that have limited energy access or maybe are dependent on kerosene and wood and other forms of energy that are not clean. But both in the past and now, my ministry focuses on supporting people in moving from a place of having the idea of what a better world could look like to actually bringing that better world into being. Now, an experience that I have all the time and that I see in other people as well is that when a big idea catches my heart, when I have the sense that God is calling me to do a good thing in the church or the world, I'm like, why isn't anybody doing this already? Is that a thought that has crossed your minds before? And it's so clear to me that this big thing ought to be done. And so clear to me, there is no way I could do that big thing because I do not have the experience or the skills or the resources or the relationships. I don't have those things. And then I'm mad because things aren't the way they should be, and I am frustrated and maybe even lonely and wondering, what am I doing in this institution? Is there even a place for the way I think in this space? Are there people here who share my values? But paradoxically, it is at those points of being so alone that somehow I rediscover that I actually do have the support of the church behind me, because there have been generations now of trailblazers who have been speaking and working on creation care. And their work has been institutionalized in our book of discipline, in our book of resolutions, in statements from the Council of Bishops. If you saw on the website, there's a section called Beautiful Words. And this is a compilation of powerful statements that have been made by our General Conference on behalf of the church to say, basically, there's a heck of a lot of space for us to get to work here. Your ideas do belong in the church. This work has a place here. And we are now called to get to work. The figuring out and the deciding whether or not we do this, a good amount of that is already done. And now we just need to step into that call that has been established and do the work. I think it's worth naming that this room is full of people who have a great deal of power and privilege relative to most people in the world. If you have the capacity to get yourself here, you have the money and the time and the resources and the smarts to do that, you have resources and money and time and smarts to invest some of that into deepening your creation care ministry, and I know many of you already are. And when we talk about creation care ministries in our communities, I want to talk about communities, both the community of the environmental movement in the United Methodist Church and our communities at home. I have noticed that most of the people in this room are white. And I am grateful for your presence and witness, and I am grateful for the presence and witness of the folks of color in this room. We heard in the previous panel a couple times the ways in which environmental impacts disproportionately harm and impact people of color. And that means part of our witness as white people, if we care about things, is bringing voices of people of color to the table, which means building relationships, listening, inviting, and letting go of power and letting other people have it so that they can be part of decision making. And my last note here is on power and on resources in the church. I have noticed a funny thing, that often the folks who are attracted to green teams in a church are not the same people who are attracted to the finance committee and the trustees committee. This is a big problem. It's funny, but it's not funny. It's really bad. Because that's where the rubber meets the road on the types of initiatives that we want to see in the world about how we are using our money, how we're using our property. There are 32,000 United Methodist churches in the US. Do you want to know how much their real estate is worth? $57.5 billion with a B. Just think if we all got together and got on those committees and really intentionally talked about how we use that property for the good of God's creation. I know it's hard, Susan, to get excited about an energy audit and changing out those fixtures, but holy moly, if we work together, we can have an incredible impact.
Yeah, not zero. Hello again, I'm Mark, and I'm from Oklahoma. And in Oklahoma, sometimes we say, if you can do creation care in Oklahoma, you can do creation care anywhere. When it comes to what the United Methodist Church has to offer in a time of ecological degradation and in a time that really is calling for an ecological conversion of the entire human community, I think that our denomination's greatest asset is also perhaps its greatest challenge. And this combination of asset and challenge is what we often simply refer to as the connection. The connection. The connection is clearly an asset in many ways. We see it, I think, on full display here at this conference and in the participation of this Creation Care Summit with bishops and boards and agencies and higher education institutions of the church all coming together to provide resources and leadership and expertise at events like this. Our connection is also a global connection. And that's an important asset as well, given the ecological challenges that we face are clearly not challenges that stop at borders. Many of them are global challenges, global crises. We United Methodists, as a global church, have shown often that when we put our minds to it, we are able to act quickly and act effectively to meet the needs of both people and all of life on the planet. UMCOR is an example of that. The Nothing But Nets Imagine No Malaria campaign is another example of that. Those are just two examples of how we United Methodists are capable of getting things done that matter for the well-being of others, especially those who are the most vulnerable among us. Compared to most other Protestant denominations, our global connection and the global reach that this connection affords us gives us one of the greatest assets that we have in addressing the call for a global ecological conversion. But our global connection also creates a set of challenges. Maintaining the institutional structures of a global church is not an easy task. It takes money, time, and energy, and it requires levels of dialogue, cooperation, and compromise that are not required as much in less connected or less connectional denominations. We have to worry about vast health insurance systems, pension systems, board and agency budgets, and many other pressing institutional challenges. We also experience a wide array of theological and cultural differences, and it's not easy to keep a global church together across these many differences and challenges. And as we come closer and closer to 2019, we see how significant and pronounced some of these differences are. Will the connection be able to hold together in a way that it can be an asset rather than a barrier to addressing the great ecological challenges of our time? This is an open question at a time when perhaps we don't have very much time to deal with such open questions. So my big hopes and dreams for the mission, ministry, and witness of the United Methodist Church on creation care and creation justice as we live into this connection that we have are that we can fully live into the promise and potential that our connection has to offer people and all of creation, the whole planet, while working through these institutional challenges in a way that don't hinder us, but rather actually enhance our ecological witness. I dream that our local churches will become places where people, especially young people, might have their first experiences of putting their hands in the soil and connecting with God's creation. I work with university students and teach environmental ethics and food ethics. Many of my students have never actually put their hands in the soil and garden. I dream that local churches will make creation care through advocacy and action be at the core of their ministries. What better way is there to love God and love our neighbors than to care for God's creation and work for a flourishing ecological community within which our human communities can thrive? I dream that our United Methodist churches would see themselves as part of a connectional movement for creation care, that we will see our global connection and all the people and resources it provides as the greatest asset we have to bring about an ecological conversion in our communities and the world. Personally, I'm very happy to have an opportunity to participate in this connectional work at a United Methodist University and with the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry Lead Hub. We'll just call it the GBHM Lead Hub and leave out all the words. Part of the mission of that hub is to network with over 1,000 Methodist-related institutions of higher education around the world to help them in their work of connecting with each other around issues of social justice and ecological sustainability. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about that initiative from some of my colleagues here at the summit. Finally, I hope that creation care will be embraced as a part of our church's evangelism efforts. Creation care is good news for the planet, and it's good news for people. A sustainable revival of churches is dependent on creation care. Very quick thought experiment. Imagine that we as a denomination will be able to turn around our declining membership and begin growing the United Methodist Church beyond our wildest dreams, so that in less than a generation, our churches are full, our budgets are booming, and our connection is thriving. How sad and tragic it would be if just 1 or 2 generations later, the membership of our denomination that had benefited so much from this significant revival saw its membership decimated by a massive die-off of humans caused by climate change that's induced by our economic and ecological collapse that our churches had done almost nothing to address. If we want more people to hear the good news that Jesus has for the world, we must find ways as a church to care for and sustain the very good world that God loves so much. Creation care is good news. Creation care is evangelism. And if people come to see our churches as places that care for people and all life on the planet, and that we are actually doing something about it, I think they'll come to our churches. We United Methodists ought to know something about renewal. So let's get down to the work of doing some serious renewing, some serious regeneration of the whole creation.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Anita, and I work for Westpath Benefits and Investments, which is the agency formerly known as the General Board of Pension and Health Benefits. And I've been in the realm of sustainable investing for 28 years, and so I've seen a lot develop over that time. And one thing that I've learned is that communities of faith are an important voice in leading change. because they have that ability to step out where others are afraid and put that moral flag in the ground and say, this is the way we should be doing things. And so, as communities of faith, we have an advantage, I think, because we understand the big picture, and we know how to work together. We care for each other, and we are persistent. I mean, we're here until they carry us out, right? So we're here for the long haul. So my frame of reference for my comments today is investments, and I recognize that may be a little bit different, so bear with me, please. In looking at through the investments, we've worked with both faith-based and also secular investors over those years to improve corporate environmental performance and their disclosure. And the conversations that I've been involved in have been going back to the 1990s. And over time, we have seen progress. We're seeing companies that are setting greenhouse gas reduction targets, and they're meeting those targets, and they're setting new targets. They're also understanding how energy efficiency saves money, and also water efficiency can save money in their operations and even down through their supply chain. And another area where we see some growth is that in the area of renewable energy, because the companies are now demanding renewable energy from their energy suppliers. And to think back to Liz's point about that 3.5%, if you're demanding the renewable energy, this has helped provide support for this critical industry, which is now, renewable energy now is at the point where it can compete on cost without any subsidies against other forms of energy. So we're now seeing tremendous growth there. And I'm very encouraged by that. Now, later in the conference, I think it's tomorrow afternoon, one of the little videos that are being shown is going to show some companies from the We Are Still In coalition, and it's companies saying what their commitments are. And as a consumer, you may want to think about that as you watch that video, and it may help inform your choices where you do or do not want to spend your money going forward. So I'll just tee that up. But this is all fine and good, but as you know, we have to do more. So another way that Westpath has been working to try to drive climate change and address it is through partnering with others. And we've been working with the Church of England and the Methodist Church in the UK and some other pension funds to launch what's called the Transition Pathway Initiative. And this initiative, it's online, it's an assessment tool that assesses the carbon performance of companies against the Paris Climate Agreement. And the Transition Pathway Initiative is a forward-looking initiative. So by that, we can look at that and we can understand which companies are making commitments, how long their commitments are for. Are they out to 2020? Are they making commitments to 2030 or even 2050? And whether or not those commitments are sufficient to do their part to achieve the Paris goal of no more than 2 degrees. On July 2nd, the Transition Pathway Initiative held an event called the State of the Transition at the London Stock Exchange, and the keynote was given by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he talked about how the church, in partnership with others, can play a leading role in tackling climate change. And he noted that the TPI, or Transition Pathway Initiative, which represents about 7 trillion pounds in assets under management, is an example of, as he says, how the church can change the weather. But the Archbishop also cautioned that we must do more. So we now have the Church of England stepping forward. 3 years ago, we had the Pope with his encyclical Laudato Si'. And of course, more than a decade ago, we had our own Council of Bishops with their call to hope and action, where they encouraged us, saying that we cannot help the world until we change our way of being in it. So these are just, the TPI is just one example of how Westpath is working with others, with our global investor peers, to try to address climate change. And one of our questions that we were asked was, what are we excited about? And so what I'd like to share with you is something that internally we've been doing that we call our Climate Action Plan. And it's a 3-step plan. Step 1 is to develop a belief. So as part of our program, we have our set of investment beliefs that kind of drive our philosophy. And last year we implemented a new one, and it's a low carbon investment belief. And this belief says very specifically that we believe a global transition to a low carbon economy is underway, that is going to create winners and losers across companies, industries, and countries, which will impact investment returns. And as a prudent fiduciary, we must assess these global risks and opportunities in the management of our funds. Step 2 is to assess the portfolio. And we have both active and passively managed. Active management means somebody is actually picking and choosing the stocks. A passive management is simply where you're buying an index, so you're buying a predetermined basket of stocks. However, the passive does not account for climate risk, so carbon is not appropriately priced. Therefore, there's risks baked into these assets that we know is there, and so we have been developing a model to help us understand where those risks lie and how we can assess whether companies are ready for the transition. So we call transition readiness or resilience, as we heard earlier. That's another frame of reference for resilience. And so developing this robust approach, which looks at 29 different indicators to give us a sense of where companies are headed with regard to climate, we think this is going to help us figure out where some risks are that we can avoid and where the opportunities lie so that we can invest in those opportunities. So step 3 of the plan is to launch it. And we will be launching this new strategy at the end of the year is what we're targeting. And we think this is a nice complement to a couple of the other things we have going on, which would be, we have about $500 million that we've invested in low carbon solutions. And then also the recently launched fossil-free suite of funds, which are called the Social Values Choice Funds. So working together, we're hoping that these initiatives will help position our portfolio and your pensions to go forward and take advantage of where we think we can in the climate area. Thank you.
I'm Bruce O. I serve as the Bishop of the Dakotas and Minnesota area, which is geographically an area the size of France. Just thought I'd throw that in. I want to take just a moment before I share a few thoughts to welcome you to Minnesota. We are delighted here in Minnesota that we are able to host this summit, and kudos to several people in the room who were instrumental in making this happen. We're very, very grateful. I'm also pleased to be a part of the panel, and I'm fortunate to go last, not because I want the last word, but because I think I could say ditto and save a lot of time. But I do want to share just a few thoughts about, particularly around the question of what charisms or assets we bring as United Methodist Church to the church and to the world in this great work of our time. I'm going to echo what Mark said about connection. I think one of the assets we bring is our connection, which is both a structural or organizational connection and a spiritual connection. If you read Wesley carefully, you'll understand that he primarily talked about connection initially as spiritual connection, and out of that grew the mechanisms that we now often refer to quickly, which are more structural and organizational. And unfortunately, our connection in recent times has come to mean appointments and apportionments. And we've lost really a lot of the power, I think, of what connection was initially intended to be about. But let me just say that I think one of the assets we have is that if we build on our historic commitment to being in covenant with one another through small groups and others, we can build in some of the learning environments that I think we're now lacking in many of our churches. We have no place to talk about difficult issues with one another in any way that's where there's a commitment to stay in relationship with one another. So I simply think it's an asset we need to build on. I think structurally, and Mark referred to this, we can do great things together when we have a compelling vision. We only look at Imagine No Malaria, Africa University, and so forth. And I'm going to come to this in just a moment, but I think we do not think big enough when it comes to creation justice and creation care. And I want to offer some thoughts about how we could think bigger about this. That's more on the scale of Imagine No Malaria and try to leverage our connection. Secondly, I think another asset we have are our general rules. We sometimes forget when our general rules were introduced by Wesley. It was at a time when when many of the lay preachers were beginning to flounder and saying, what do we need, or here, help us understand how to sustain the revival movement. And you know the general rules. Come on. Do good, do no harm. Yeah, do no harm, do good. I just want to lift that up as an asset because I think it captures much of what we heard Tim and others say. When to do good is really about conservation and waste reduction. It's the mercy part of this. To do no harm is the regeneration part of creation care. And the staying in relationship with God or being in love with God is staying in relationship with the Creator, which is really about claiming our spiritual authority in this matter. And I'm going to preach a bit about this tomorrow night around the sermon title of the power of blessing. I think another asset we have is our tradition of advocacy. I'm not going to say much more about that. One asset I think we have that is not leveraged for us in the United Methodist Church because it's so fragmented, and that's our educational system. Let me just give you a list. Seminaries, universities, course of study, licensed local pastor schools, institutes such as this, summits such as this, schools of missions, United Methodist Women, our agency and conference training events, provisional years training, camping program, and the list goes on and on and on. But we are very fragmented in what we do in terms of educating around creation care and creation justice. I'm wondering what it would look like if we could get a basic curriculum and introduce it in every aspect of this educational system. What that would look like. And simply say that we're all going to stay on the same message. We are terrible as United Methodist Church of staying on the same message. Or staying focused on anything for more than 5 minutes, except homosexuality. Another asset we have, and I see my time is going very quickly, is our the 4 areas of missional focus that were lifted up in 2008, and I just want to lift up the two dealing with ministry with the poor and global health. I would love to see us have an environment or a climate justice overlay or umbrella for those 2 areas of missional focus. I think it's the way to begin to get at the issues of environmental racism. I won't say any more about that. Just a couple of quick big hopes or dreams. What if we made a commitment to have 1 million creation care advocates or earth keepers? 1 million. Susan, that was for Minnesota. 1 million. What if we could redirect much of what we're doing around global health to focus on creation justice and creation care? Because I think that would actually capture in a much better way the intention. What if we, I already said that. I'm going to leave that alone. Here's one. I know, I see it. What if we were to work with 50 of our largest congregations in the United States to have them develop solar gardens, much like you saw in the little video clip of Shiloh Temple right here in Minneapolis. And then finally, I'm going to say this. I know I'm over. Actions and behaviors shape attitudes and culture much more quickly and profoundly than traditional educational paradigms, and certainly much more quicker than passing resolutions. Thus, I'd like to see every local United Methodist Church engage in some sign act that is behavioral in nature. I want to be on the side of encourage even the small things. I believe until we get the people on the finance committee putting their aluminum cans in recycling, you're not going to change anything else. Because it's the sign acts, it's the actual behaviors that change culture. And you know what? No organization can fulfill its goals without changing the culture first. When we try to set goals and think that'll change the culture, it doesn't work. When you change the culture and then you set a goal, then you can achieve the goal. We need to really stay focused on the behavioral activities of folks, even if they're small activities. And that's not to deny the importance of advocacy. I got to stop. I'm done. I could keep going, but I'm done.
To the organizers, how much time do we have? Are we really 5:30 break?
Let's get a sense of the room. We said we were going to end at 5:30, and then we'll go for a meal at 6. The meal time is flexible. It goes from 6 to 7:30 because they cannot feed pizza to all of us at one time. So it's a long dinner time between 6 and 7:30. So if you would like to have a firm stop at 5:30, please raise your hand. If you would like to, question. There will be opportunities for sharing tomorrow. It's not the same. It's not a panel, but we'll have opportunities to sit around tables and discuss with one another. It won't be exactly like this. Okay, those of you that would be interested in extending this time to, what do you think, like 5:45? 5:45. How many would want to extend to 5:45? Okay, looks like that's where we want to go.
Okay, all y'all that said that, when you talk, you got to talk short. I was asked to summarize, and I'm going to say just two things. You have an amazing church that has done amazing things throughout history. John Wesley has given a clear vision that should motivate people, and you've got incredible people in your agencies, in your congregations. You've got diversity. You've got a global presence. You all can do amazing things. And that's a sociologist talking. And that's why I do this. But the other thing I want to say is that every one of you probably saves money for the future because you want to make a better future somehow. We are talking about a future that is really not imaginable to us in some ways. That's how big this thing is that people are talking about. And what I heard is the small things are important. The different gifts you have and places to do them are important. There is not one way to do this. But if we don't keep sight of that really big picture of what's at stake, we can lose heart. So that's what I hear folks from the United Methodist Church saying to you today. What are your thoughts? I saw a million hands, so let's have all the hands up of people who want to say something in the next 15 minutes. Okay, good. Could you all just stand up so I don't have to keep track of you as well? Right, why don't you come up? That's what these chairs are for. Start talking.
So I would like Bishop O to tell me all the other things on that piece of paper. No, I'm serious. I want to hear from our bishops the leadership that you offer, and then we act on it.
Actually, I got through most of it. So I would just a couple other things. In terms of leveraging assets, one of the things we often complain about is that historically within the United States, that we ended up in a lot of rural settings and rural communities, a lot of small churches. I actually think it's an asset when it comes to creation care. It's both a challenge and an asset. I was fortunate when I was growing up that I worked for my uncle on the original homestead that he grew up on and my father grew up on. But in the 70s and 80s, he was practicing sustainable agriculture. If we could begin to leverage all of these small rural agricultural communities to, again, engage in these kind of sign acts, I think it could be a big difference. One of the other things I had is that we need a better networking system. we don't know what each other does. I've already heard several people here say part of the reason I came to the summit is because I wanted to network. I wanted to hear, you know, what works. We just need to have a better system of letting people know what works. Here in Minnesota, this is very particular to Minnesota, but one of my goals, and I think some of you are going to be engaged in a field trip tomorrow, but is for this conference to return or rematriate the Red Rock or Inyan Cha. It's really a matter of ecological justice, and I think there are other places within our connection where there are sacred objects that if we were to engage with indigenous populations, again, it begins to change attitudes. It's changed culture. We're already seeing that here in Minnesota as I've been trying to educate people. It begins to change your way of thinking about the world, and that's where we need to start. I don't want to dominate here. Let me stop with this. I do think that if we want to become a learning community and engage with other movements, we ought to be talking to indigenous populations, indigenous people, sort of the original creation care people. And just one resource that some of you may know about, but the Red Cloud Renewable Energy Center on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota is trying to move the Oglala Sioux toward energy or independence from fossil fuels. Now, if that could be accomplished within the indigenous community, it'd be a powerful learning for us.
Thank you. The problem is I give up my mic, I give up my ability to
I'm Dan Dranko from Nashville, and like Dr. Kearns, I kind of study both sociology and sustainability. And I've come to the conclusion in social movements and transformations in the country, we think it's often, well, we disrupt things and we force the powerful to do things. I actually think when the major changes come is when more the majority morally believes it's the right thing to do. We got a major transformation, and we're going to have to carry a lot of people with us. Wanted to say one other quick thing is that we don't have red states and blue states. Our biggest cultural and political divide in this country right now is I grew up in a small town, and my high school is gone from that small town. Our biggest political divide, sociology will tell you, is between towns and cities. And like Bishop O said, if we can get rural and also larger towns, and Methodism is all over those towns, and we need to figure out how to do that. Probably the most heartening thing I heard today is when the woman back there said they had Southern Illinois and Central Illinois passed a resolution, and I know that area, and there's a lot of towns in that area. So as Earth Keepers and as Creation Care folks, we need to figure out how to have that conversation with our churches in these towns to make this kind of moral transformation we need to do. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Come on up.
Eric Rasmussen. I'm from the New York Annual Conference, and one of the things I do there is serve on the board of ecumenical and interfaith relations. And when you're going through what are the things that we have, the assets, that's one of them. Methodism has had a strong care for, support for, interest in ecumenical interfaith relations. And when we talk about, I mean, one of the problems we've mentioned is we're small and the issue is big. You know, there are people well, I live in an area where there are Jews and Jains and Hindus and Islams and Brahma Kumaris and Shinnecocks and so on and so on. We have 17 different religious groups on Long Island. And there are people in those, either the ecumenical Protestant community or into the interreligious community that, you know, they have a spiritual force and a concern about these same issues. Now, for some folks, you may live in rural areas where there's less opportunity, but in every conference there are places that are not rural where there are all those kinds of connections. And I just like to say that that's really important to keep in mind. We are not simply, how shall we Methodists do this, nor is it even working out to other communities, the political force, the monetary agents, but really looking at the other spiritual communities.
Thank you. That is a very important thing, is that in your different settings, you have different partners to work with. Who else? Who else that hasn't spoken? Pat? Is it true you haven't spoken?
It's true. Do I need to sit down already? So I had a comment after the first panel in terms of relationships. I loved that conversation. And I just wanted to lift up the importance of relationship with God and all these relationships that we talk about. I think sometimes we're motivated by the injustices in the world, and that's terribly appropriate. But I think for me personally, if my motivation to worry about fracking, for example, comes because I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ, that gives me just a different perspective on it. And for me, it helps me. And if I'm thinking about transforming the church and our understanding in the church to think theologically and how to do that, maybe will be an asset that we have, is an asset that we have, I think, to help people understand that part and parcel of their responsibility as disciples of Jesus Christ is to be involved in this stuff. And the other comment is from our bishop in North Carolina. I love your suggestions, Bishop, and maybe we can, not maybe, we'll make those happen somehow. But our bishop in North Carolina, I'm a part of a creation care ministry team in the North Carolina Annual Conference, and our bishop gave us a mandate to the team, and that mandate was, she said, I want you to shift the theological understanding of every United Methodist in the North Carolina Annual Conference as to how we understand biblically and theologically God's creation and our role in it. Now, how's that for a mandate from a bishop? That's really cool. And if we could do that, it would transform the North Carolina Annual Conference. There's no doubt it would transform us. Thank you.
So Carol, no. Well, I know we've got panelists up here also that want to speak, so you may not be last, but you may be the last of the floor. Okay.
I want to speak to what Susan asked about.
And your name again?
My name is Jo, and I'm from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I'm a deacon, and I work in mental health. And Susan asked what we could do, and one of the things we could do. And I think one of the things we could do to help our congregations move forward is help them realize that things have changed and that the world is no longer the same. One of the most important things I can do as a therapist for my clients is help them realize that, help them let go of the past and help them grieve. And I think we might have to let some of our congregations grieve that things are not the same, and grieve that they gotta let go of the styrofoam. And so I think that's an important step that we might have to just realize that we might have to help them through that process.
Mine's real quick. I'm Jonathan Brake. I'm from the Western North Carolina Conference. Mark, when you were giving your introduction, I was very encouraged by your words, which sound like a homily to me. I was just wondering, is there any way we can get those on the website so we could enjoy and share and quote you correctly in some of what you said? Perfect. Great. Thanks.
Carol?
Just really quickly, and it's a statement and a question. I've been working in our conference for many, many years trying to get our volunteers in mission teams before they go to mission sites to look at the structural and systemic problems there. And we worked up some resources for that, but found tremendous resistance. And then in the Great Plains Conference, we have a full-time staff person, and I am not denigrating her at all, but our conference has a full-time staff person for disaster relief. And we have no structural investment in why are so many of these, quote, natural disasters happening in the first place. So I guess my question is, Are there resources within the connectional system to help our volunteers and mission teams begin to connect the dots, and all of our disaster coordinators? That's a question.
I share your dream. And I think it would be really great for you to share your dream more broadly, to share that dream with your disaster coordinator and maybe send a note. I know. And go on the EPCOR website and shoot some emails off about that. I mean, and all of you, like, if this is the sort of thing you want to see, like, they really do read those emails. And it would be good because there's an awareness. There is an awareness, like I said, part of why they created this role is because there's an awareness that there's a connection, and it's a heavy lift to actually implement, so we're starting with the Earth Keepers and the renewable energy, like there's kind of this low-hanging fruit, but then to transform the way we connect at the local level, the disaster relief and the greening, and how do we do recovery? I mean, these are really important questions. What does it mean? We talk a lot about building back better. What does that look like from an environmental perspective? So I say keep asking those questions and ask them loud. They're important questions, and we know it, and, squeaky wheels, yeah.
What would that person be called?
I would send a note to Kathy Earle, the director of U.S. or Inter.
What are we telling them we want? We don't want a disaster relief person.
Well, I think you want to see a deeper connection between the church's disaster relief efforts and its environmental stewardship efforts. You want them to connect disaster recovery and environmental stewardship explicitly.
And our human complicity, I mean, why are there so many more natural disasters?
I heard you say the training in our own team.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other local thing that can happen, part of how disaster recovery grants are structured now is we give annual conferences a lot of freedom to name what they need in their conference, in their recovery effort. And this is like a good and important value in disaster recovery. So something you might consider if you're involved in that work in your conference is starting to identify what building back with an environmental stewardship lens ought to look like. Because you know what? You could include in your grant proposal that you need solar, that you need energy efficiency components. Like, I think it would be awesome if those kind of requests were coming in with the grant proposals. I don't work on that stuff myself, but I keep sort of wondering out loud, how do we bring that to our recovery? And everybody kind of knows we need it. It's just we got to move.
Can I comment on this very quickly? So Jenny, I agree with you. I think you want to encourage folks to become the squeaky wheels. I get that. I would encourage United Methodist Committee on Relief to go to work before they get these emails and start to identify regenerative projects or even conservation projects and start listing them as options for volunteers in mission. I think teams would respond, but they don't know that there's a possibility until we start saying, here are the projects, and then train toward that as well. I think we could. These are some of the SINAC kinds of things I'm talking about that will change culture. Just like do your job. Yes.
No, because I came to live as listed. Are you Bishop Oates?
Yes.
That we need training for our volunteers in mission and our disaster coordinators to do ecological work.
Yes.
So we're hearing that's the message I should take.
Right. And then start.
Can I get an amen?
And identify the projects. Start. When the disaster happens, we immediately identify the kind of projects. Start identifying the projects now. We have a disaster, so let's get the projects identified.
Oh, you want me to talk? Yeah, so Bishop, since you're talking, so since you're still sitting up there, I wanted to grab the mic real quick. So as indigenous peoples, traditional practitioners anyway of our ancient religions, we tend to think holistically, and you're talking about connectedness, and I see that kind of philosophical parallel here. And When Europeans came here, and when the church came here and so arrogantly built churches on our land without asking us for even our theological input, I want to use this space to give some theological input, because you said the word homosexuality. So when people, missionaries started talking about this Jesus of Nazareth to my people, we found this person attractive because this person was a healer and worked with the elements of the earth, just like our people work with the elements of the earth. In our traditional culture, nobody ever invited us to the theological table, but we always view those who stand in the middle, queer persons, as holy persons. And the reason is because they stand in the middle, can see multiple perspectives. And these are people traditionally that have very intimate relations with the natural world because they were chosen to be plant gatherers. And so they know where the crevices on the bark are on the trees. And they know what plants are good for that person that's going to sing over the formulas, prescribed formulas over these plants. And they know what animals that they have to be in communion with, intimate communion with, to draw on the spirit of those animals for healing too. And we have been so exclusionary in the church of these healers. And so I want you to go to your people, your bishop people, and tell them that my people, we have some traditional theological perspectives on human sexuality too, and it fits into this creation care discourse. So I just want to say that much. Madigostos.
All I need to say is amen. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think that is a moment we should thank all these folks because what they have done is draw the circle wide for us. They have shown us the many ways, the connections, the relations, this is about everything you do. And so I want to offer my thanks to all of you, and I want to ask you to join me in thanking all of our panelists and all of our participants for this really rich conversation on just our first afternoon.
Before we switch gears into some other announcements, I want you to keep what's in your mind right now. Tomorrow, we are going to be doing a series of breakout sessions where you all get to pick the topics. I heard about 100 really great topics where we're going to have opportunities for people to name. I really want to talk about how to do each one of these great ideas. It's going to get written up there. There will be a table to go to. You will have a chance to sit with people who are talking about a topic you want to talk about. There will be a chance to gather your ideas digitally as we do it, so that we will have a chance to take all of these great ideas and start to make some plans. So while you're thinking, while you're dreaming, when you can't sleep tonight, hopefully you can sleep tonight, write those ideas down and think of which topics you want to talk about tomorrow. Be ready to propose them. We'll have at least as many tables as we have in the room here, and more if we need to, of possible actions to start dreaming about and acting on. So I just wanted to add that in terms of your thinking for tomorrow. And now some more logistical questions about what comes next, I believe.
So the next thing is dinner is between 6 and 7:30 at Hamlin Church. I think many of you know where Hamlin Church is, but Englewood Avenue is the street that runs this way on that side. And if you go out there and turn left, Hamlin Church will be on your right, and it looks very churchy. You will not, it looks like a church. You won't miss it. It's on Englewood, yes. Pizza will be served wherever they serve it to us, which I think they were hoping it would be outside, but I don't know if they will decide that the temperature would move us in. But if you have warm clothes, bring them. It may be that we have both options. I don't know.